I have the full transcript. Let me write the new story. I'll avoid all names in the file. Sarah, Marcus, Richard, Susan, Vanessa, Patricia, Ellen, Claire, Derek, Diane, Bethany, and create completely new ones. The moment I heard my brother's voice boom across that auditorium, I knew exactly what was coming. I just didn't know I'd end up on the floor. Let me back up. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the summers are brutal and the money flows easy if you know the right people, and my family always knew the right people. My father, Warren, built a mid-sized commercial cleaning company from nothing. He liked to say he built it with his hands, which was technically true, but conveniently left out that his mother-in-law floated the first 3 years of payroll. My mother, Lorraine, ran the front office and managed the books and spent most of her energy convincing the neighbors that we were a certain kind of family. The kind with a nice house in Arcadia. The kind whose son was going places. My brother Colton is 4 years younger than me. He is tall, broad-shouldered, and has always known exactly how a room responds to him when he walks in. People like Colton. That part was never the problem. The problem was that my parents liked him so much they forgot they had 2 children. I started working when I was 14. Not because I had to. My father's company wasn't rich, but we weren't struggling. But because I wanted to save money for college, and nobody in my house was talking about a plan for me. There was always a plan for Colton. My parents started a college fund for him when he was 7. Mine apparently slipped through the cracks. I asked once, sophomore year, if they'd started saving for my tuition. My mother looked genuinely confused, like I'd asked about a country she'd never heard of. "You're so capable," she said. "You'll figure it out." So I figured it out. I worked weekends at a sandwich shop on Camelback Road. I saved birthday money. I babysat 3 kids in the neighborhood for 2 years straight every Friday night while my friends went to football games. By the time I graduated high school, I had a little over $6,000 in a savings account I'd opened myself at 16. I applied to Arizona State on a partial academic scholarship and worked out the rest with loans and 2 part-time jobs. I was pre-med for a year, switched to health administration, graduated in 5 years instead of 4 because I had to drop to part-time enrollment twice when the shifts got heavy. Colton, meanwhile, had his college fund, his parents' credit card for incidentals, and a used Range Rover my father bought him for his 18th birthday because the commute to Arizona State was, according to my mother, too brutal for a bus. I drove a 2009 Honda Fit with a cracked dashboard and an aux cord that only worked if you held it at a specific angle. None of that is the point, though. The point is what happened after I graduated. I got a job at a hospital network in Phoenix doing operational planning. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid $58,000 to start, which felt like a fortune compared to the $13 an hour I'd been making. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Tempe, started paying down my student loans, and for the first time in my life felt like I was actually standing on solid ground. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Nana Ruth, called me the week I moved in. She lived in a retirement community outside Tucson, and we'd always been close in a quiet way. The kind of closeness that doesn't need a lot of words. She asked about the apartment, about the job, about whether I bought a proper mattress or was still sleeping on that awful futon. I told her I finally bought a real bed frame. She laughed. "Good girl," she said. "You always land on your feet." I didn't know what she'd been doing on her end of things all those years. She'd worked as an accountant her whole life, made smart investments, lived small, and never talked about money the way people who have it sometimes do. She just quietly had it. I had no idea how much. That phone call was 3 years before everything fell apart. The first time my parents asked me for money, Colton was 23 and had just launched what he called a lifestyle brand. It was, as far as I could tell, an Instagram account and a logo. He wanted to do partnerships with outdoor gear companies and sell branded merchandise and eventually build a retreat center in Sedona for performance-focused entrepreneurs. My father presented this to me over Sunday dinner as though he were pitching a board of investors. "Colton has a vision," he said. "We just need bridge funding to get the LLC off the ground. Legal fees, the website, some inventory to show potential partners." I asked how much. My mother said, $18,000. I was 27. I had $22,000 in savings, which represented 4 years of extreme discipline and 0 vacations. I felt the number leave my body before I even processed what I was agreeing to. "I can do 10, I said. "I can't do 18. My father said 10 would work. My mother patted my hand. Colton thanked me with a side hug and then immediately started talking about color palettes for the website. I transferred the $10,000 the following Monday. Colton's brand posted twice on Instagram that month and then went quiet. He pivoted, he said. New direction. He was now interested in app development. The app needed a developer. The developer cost $24,000. My parents presented this to me 4 months later. I said no. I did not have $24,000. My mother said I should look into a personal loan. Banks love you, she said with the confidence of someone who had never had to take out a loan in her life. Your credit is excellent. I did not take out a loan for my brother's app, but I did loan him $7,500 6 months later when my father called and said Colton was 3 months behind on rent and about to be evicted. It's just a bridge, my dad said. He's this close to a deal. The deal didn't materialize. The $7,500 was never mentioned again. By the time Colton was 26, I had given my family, and various combinations and justifications, a total of $31,000. I had done the math. I know it sounds like a lot. It was a lot. It happened slowly, transaction by transaction, each one reasonable sounding in isolation. Just this one thing, just to get him over this one hurdle. Just because you're so capable and you'll be fine. And every time I handed money over, I felt something in me get quieter, like a light dimming in a room that nobody was watching anyway. The summer Colton was 26, he announced he was going back to school. An MBA program at the University of Colorado. Full 2 years. The cost, with living expenses in Boulder, would run close to $95,000. My parents' contribution, $40,000, pulled from the company's line of credit. They came to me for the rest. I was 30 by then. I had rebuilt my savings to $38,000. I was still paying student loans. I was still driving a used car, a slightly better one now, a 2016 Civic, but still. I had finally started contributing properly to my 401k. I had just made a tentative appointment with a financial advisor for the first time in my life. I said no. My mother cried. My father went quiet in a specific way that was worse than yelling. Colton texted me 3 paragraphs about opportunity and sacrifice and the fact that he would have done it for me. I did not respond. The following month, my parents told the extended family at a 4th of July cookout that I was going through something. An aunt asked if I was okay. I had no idea what they'd said specifically, but I could tell from the way people looked at me that whatever it wasn't flattering. I stopped attending most family events after that. I am telling you all this so you understand that by the time my grandmother's attorney called me on a Tuesday morning in October, I had already done the math on my family about 100 times and landed on the same answer. The call came while I was at my desk eating a sat salad and reviewing a facilities report. The number was a Tucson area code. The man on the other end introduced himself as Gerald Okafor, estate attorney, and said he was representing the estate of Ruth Eleanor Marsh, my Nana Ruth, who had passed away 4 days earlier. I didn't know she was sick. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She hadn't wanted me to know. She'd made that decision on her own, for her own reasons, and I had to sit with that in a conference room doorway with my salad getting warm and my whole body going still. Mr. Okafor was kind. He gave me a moment. Then he said there were some matters requiring my attention and asked if I could come to Tucson. I drove down on a Saturday. His office was in a small building near the university. Wooden bookshelves floor to ceiling, a plant that had clearly been there for decades. He sat across from me and opened a folder and explained, in careful measured language, that my grandmother had established a revocable trust in 2009. She had updated it in 2018. I was the sole primary beneficiary. The trust's value at time of distribution, $4.1 million. I made him repeat the number. He did. Nana Ruth had never owned a home worth more than $180,000. She drove a Camry until it literally stopped starting. She clipped grocery coupons. She was the most methodical person I had ever met, and apparently she had been quietly and methodically building something for decades. Mutual funds, dividend reinvestments, 2 commercial property purchases in Tucson in the 90s that had appreciated beyond anything she'd anticipated. She had managed it all herself, through an advisor she trusted, and she had told nobody. The 28th Amendment specified something unusual. Mr. Okafor read it aloud from the document. Nana Ruth had written it herself in plain language she'd insisted on. The trust shall pass to Ashley in full and without restriction on the condition that Ashley has not, in the 3 years prior to Ruth Owen or Marsh's date of death, accepted financial assistance from Warren or Lorraine Marsh, directly or indirectly. This condition exists because Ashley is the only member of this family who has stood on her own feet without taking from others, and I want to protect that for her. She earned this alone. I sat in Gerald Okafor's office for a long time after he stopped talking. He handed me a tissue. The condition was met. I had not taken money from my parents in 3 years. I had said no, and it had cost me 4th of July cookouts and Sunday dinners and a comfortable fiction that my family was just a normal family who sometimes asked a lot, and apparently that cost had also purchased something. He explained the timeline. Distribution would begin in 60 days. There were taxes, minor administrative steps, but the process was straightforward. He would handle everything. I asked him not to notify my parents. He explained that as a matter of estate administration, the family would eventually learn of the trust's existence. My mother was named in the will, a separate document, with a personal bequest of $15,000 and a handwritten note, which Mr. Okafor had not read and which was sealed. I asked how long we had before that was likely to happen. He said probably 2 to 3 months, given the administrative timeline. I drove home to the desert thinking about my grandmother clipping coupons with $4 million sitting in accounts she never mentioned. I thought about her voice on the phone 3 years earlier. You always land on your feet. She knew what she was doing. She had built a net underneath me that I didn't know was there, and she'd made sure I didn't know it was there, because she understood that knowing would have changed things. I did not tell anyone. I kept going to work. I kept making my loan payments. I had one dinner with a close friend from college, Jess, who was the only person who knew any of this in real time. And I sat across from her at a Thai restaurant and told her everything and then ate my entire plate of pad see ew in silence. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm not giving any of it to Colton." She raised her glass. I raised mine. The news reached my parents 6 weeks later. I don't know exactly how, whether the estate notice was filed in a way that was publicly accessible, or whether Nana Ruth's neighbor said something, or whether my mother simply had a network that moved information faster than administrative timelines. But my father called me on a Wednesday evening, and his voice was different. Careful. Warm in a way that put my entire body on alert. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. My father has never called me sweetheart in my adult life. He told me he'd heard about the trust. He said he was so glad Nana Ruth had been so thoughtful. He said it was a wonderful thing, a blessing really, and that he and Mom were thinking we should all get together and talk about what this meant for the family going forward. I said I was busy. He said this weekend would work. I said I'd think about it. He said, and I remember this precisely because I've replayed it many times since, $4 million is a lot for one person to manage alone, Ashley. You need people around you. I thanked him and got off the phone and called Mr. Okafor. The family dinner happened, not because I wanted it to, but because I understood that avoiding it indefinitely would create a different kind of problem. I drove to my parents' house in Arcadia on a Sunday. My mother made pot roast. Colton was there, still enrolled in his MBA program, somehow. He looked well rested. He had a new watch. We ate for 20 minutes before my father put down his fork and said, "We should talk about a plan." The plan, as he outlined it, involved establishing a family investment entity, an LLC, through which my inheritance would be pooled with the company's assets to create generational wealth. He had printed a 1-page summary. He slid it across the table. It had bullet points and a logo which suggested this had been prepared before dinner. Colton pulled out his own document. His MBA program, he said, had prepared him to lead something like this. He could manage the entity. The operational planning experience he was building through school was exactly the kind of thing this required. He looked at me steadily. "You've always been the practical one," he said. "You know this makes sense. The number they were proposing I contribute to this entity, $2.8 million. My mother said it would stay in the family. I looked at the logo on the 1-page summary. Someone had put real time into that logo. I folded the paper in half. "No," I said. The dinner ended shortly after that, not dramatically. No one threw anything. No one raised their voice past a certain level. But the temperature dropped and stayed there. My mother walked me to the door in silence. My father shook his head the entire time I was putting on my jacket. Colton said, from the couch without looking up from his phone. "You're going to regret being this selfish." I drove home on the 202 with the windows down and the November air cold on my face, and something loosening in my chest that had been knotted there for years. 2 weeks later, my parents filed an emergency petition for conservatorship in Maricopa County. The filing alleged that I had displayed erratic decision-making in the wake of a significant bereavement, that I had refused reasonable family support and guidance, and that my psychological state following my grandmother's death rendered me potentially unable to manage a large estate responsibly. They submitted, as evidence, a signed statement from a therapist, someone I had never met, someone who had not evaluated me, characterizing my recent behavior as consistent with grief-induced impaired judgment. I found out through Mr. Okafor, who called me on a Monday morning and said, "I want you to know about this before you hear it another way." I sat on the floor of my kitchen, not because I was devastated exactly, more because it required a moment to understand that this was actually happening. That my parents, having failed to get what they wanted through a nice dinner and a one-pager with a logo, had decided to go to court to have me declared incompetent. Mr. Okafor already had a response in progress. He had anticipated this. He'd been practicing estate law for 30 years, and he had seen this specific play before. He told me to stay calm, to document everything, and to be in his office Thursday morning. Thursday morning came. I sat across from him, and he walked me through what Nana Ruth had built into the trust structure, because she had built things in, a clause that voided any third-party intervention under demonstrated coercion or family financial pressure. A documented record of my independent financial history going back to my first savings account at 16, which Nana Ruth's advisor had been quietly compiling on her instruction for over a decade. Receipts, statements, copies of my loan payments, my lease agreements, my tax returns. A paper trail that proved in systematic detail that I had never been financially dependent on my parents in my adult life. My grandmother had known. She had known they would try this. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday in December. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Beige walls, fluorescent light, no gallery except for a few chairs in the back where Gerald Okafor's assistant sat with a rolling briefcase. My parents came with their attorney, a man named Philip Storch, who wore a suit that was slightly too large and spoke very fast. I wore the blazer I'd bought with the first real paycheck of my career. It still fit. Philip Storch argued that my refusal to accept family guidance indicated a concerning pattern of isolation following bereavement, and that a temporary conservatorship would protect my interests and the estate's integrity while I received appropriate support. Mr. Okafor submitted the trust document, the independent financial record, the anti-coercion clause, the forged therapist evaluation, which he had already reported to the state licensing board, and a letter from Nana Ruth's own primary physician confirming she had been of entirely sound mind when the 2018 amendment was drafted. He also submitted, with the court's permission, a single exhibit that I hadn't known about until that morning. A letter, handwritten, from my grandmother to the court, dated 18 months before her death. She had anticipated a possibility of this, or something like it, and she had written to any court that might ever review the trust. The judge read it to herself. Then she looked up. She read part of it aloud. My grandmother wrote, "Ashley has never asked anyone for a single thing she could earn herself. Please do not let people who could not see that while I was alive come in afterwards and claim it means she can't manage what I left her. It means exactly the opposite." The petition was denied. My parents walked out of that courtroom and into the parking lot, and I watched my father try to put his arm around my mother, and she stepped away from him, just slightly, just enough. I don't know what that meant. I don't know what that said to each other that night or in the weeks after. I have not spoken to them since. Colton withdrew from his MBA program in January. I don't know the full story, but I heard through a cousin that the funding arrangement with the company had something to do with it. My father's business lost 2 major contracts in the spring. The fraud allegation that surfaced during the conservatorship proceedings had made a small amount of local news, enough to matter. I took 3 months to figure out what I actually wanted. I hired a financial planner, my own, not Mr. Pad. Okafor's referral, someone I found and vetted myself. I paid off my student loans in full in February. I woke up on the morning the final payment cleared and stood in my kitchen and drank my coffee and felt something I didn't immediately have a word for. Clean, maybe. Unencumbered. I started a scholarship fund in Nana Ruth's name. She had never gone to college, she'd gotten her accounting certification through night school while raising 2 daughters, and she always said that was fine, it worked out. But I think it was also something she'd wanted. The Ruth Marsh Scholarship goes to community college students in the Phoenix Metro who are supporting themselves financially while enrolled. The first year we funded 8 students. 2 of them came to a small reception I hosted, and one of them told me she was in her 2nd semester of nursing prerequisites and working the overnight shift at a grocery store, and had basically decided to quit school before the scholarship came through. I thought about that a lot. I still live in Tempe. I bought a house, a real one, a small one, a 1970s ranch with a carport and an orange tree in the backyard that produces more fruit than I can ever use. I leave bags of oranges on the neighbors' porches in winter. I started a raised garden bed. I go to a ceramics class on Tuesday nights and I am genuinely bad at it, and I keep going. Jess asked me recently if I ever feel guilty. About Colton, about my parents, about the money that could have done something for them. I thought about it. I thought about my grandmother working as an accountant for 40 years and living carefully and building something quietly while everyone around her spent freely and borrowed without counting. I thought about her writing that letter to a court she might never need, just in case, just to make sure someone said it clearly. Ashley earned this alone. Guilt requires believing you took something that belonged to someone else. I didn't. I said no, repeatedly, across many years, to people who had trained themselves to treat my yes as a given, and every time I said no they found a new reason why the no didn't count. Because I was selfish, because I was ungrateful, because I was in grief, because I was in grief, because I was irrational, because I needed to be managed. The last time anyone in my family suggested I didn't know how to stand on my own, I was standing in a courtroom with my grandmother's handwriting projected on a wall. I know how to stand. I've been doing it since I was 14. I used to think the hardest thing about saying no was the word itself. It turns out the word is easy. What's hard is everything that comes after. The silence at the dinner table, the way a parent's voice goes flat, the cousins who look at you sideways at holidays because someone got to them first with a version of the story where you're the villain. What I've learned, sitting with all of it now, is that the people who took from me didn't start out thinking of themselves as people who take. My father Warren genuinely believed he was building something for the family. My mother Lorraine genuinely believed that pooling resources was practical, logical, the smart play. Even Colton, I think, had convinced himself that my money flowing toward his ideas was a kind of collaboration. They had built a story around our family's dynamic, and in that story, my role made sense. I was the capable one, the practical one, the one who figured things out. And capable people can handle a little more, right? Just this once? Just to get over this hurdle. The problem with that story is that it never had an ending where I got to want something for myself. What finally broke the pattern wasn't the trust. It wasn't $4 million appearing in my life. It was the years before that. Every time I said no and bore the cost of it alone. Every missed dinner. Every cousin who thought I was cold. Every uncomfortable phone call I let go to voicemail. Those weren't failures. They were the thing I was actually building, quietly, the same way Nana Ruth built her accounts. One careful decision at a time, compound interest on self-respect. Nana Ruth saw it. She saw it at the front desk when I was 12, according to what Gerald read from her files. She saw a kid who didn't ask for things she could earn herself, and she understood that the world would not automatically reward that quality. She understood that people who give willingly attract people who take reflexively, and that the taker never sees a problem until the giver stops. So she built something. Not just money. A record. A documented argument for my own competence, filed away in case someone ever tried to use a courtroom to say otherwise. That's the part that stayed with me longest. That she anticipated it. That she knew, before any of it happened, that the people who had treated me like a resource my whole life might one day try to formalize that arrangement, and she prepared accordingly. I think about what that took. The patience. The quiet. The willingness to do the right thing without telling anyone she was doing it. That's not luck. That's character compounding over decades. And when Colton's app collapsed and Warren lost his contracts and the house in Arcadia went up for sale, that wasn't punishment handed down from somewhere. It was just the math. You cannot build a future on someone else's foundation without their consent and expect it to hold. The structure was always wrong. It was always going to come down eventually. I just happened to not be underneath it when it did. The scholarship carries her name now. Ruth Marsh. 8 students in the first year, more every year since. I go to the reception each fall, and I listen to them talk about working overnight shifts and missing things and choosing the longer road because it was the only one they could afford. And I think Nana Ruth would have liked this room. That's what stays. Not the courtroom. Not the look on my father's face when the petition was denied. Not any of it. Just 8 kids with laptops and the particular kind of tired that comes from knowing exactly what everything cost and paying it anyway. That's the only inheritance worth passing on.